again, let me put off the section on the Congregation Doctrine of the Faith document and go to another element here of the Motu Proprio. What was it in the Holy Father's previous activity in writing that laid the groundwork for, provided the context for this Motu Proprio? During the 1990s, Cardinal Ratzinger was working on a book, which he finally completed in 1999 in September, called The Spirit of the Liturgy. I believe it's the most beautiful, profound book on the Holy Mass that's ever been written by anybody at any time. And if you have not read that, I recommend it very, very highly. In that book, Cardinal Ratzinger takes as his foundational text the Exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and their transition into the Promised Land. And he says two things about that text which were new to me, at least new insights for me, although perhaps not to you. They're pretty obvious. The first one was that the purpose of the Exodus was not for the Jewish people to have a new land. Yes, they were going to have a promised land, but that wasn't the deepest purpose. When God appears to Moses in the burning bush and reveals his name, I am, and say to Pharaoh, the God of your fathers, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, sent me to you, he tells Moses to ask Pharaoh to let his people go out in the desert so they can worship and offer sacrifice. And that's what Moses does. He goes to Pharaoh and says, let my people go, let us go out of the desert, let us offer our sacrifices to the Lord. I always took that as a pretext, that the real reason was to escape Egypt and go to Palestine, but that they had to give some excuse to the Pharaoh. But Cardinal Ratzinger says, no, the real reason was precisely to be taught by God how to sacrifice. Why? Because it wouldn't have been of any use for there to be another ancient people with another land like anybody else, unless Israel had as its core right worship, the proper relation with God. It would be just another people, and no reason for any special choice or selection. But God chose his people to be his own and to offer fitting worship to him. So that was the first insight, that the real reason of the Exodus was to learn proper worship. The second insight was this. If you think about Moses on Mount Sinai, I think the image we have is the bearded man carrying 2 tablets with the 10 Commandments on them. Moses received the law, the 10 Commandments on Sinai, and that's absolutely right, he did. What Cardinal Ratzinger points out in his book, The Spirit of the Liturgy, is that there were 3 sets of laws or regulations which Moses received. He did receive the 10 Commandments as a code of personal morality. He also received about 600 others that had to do with the community life and the social life of the Jewish people. But the third and most important set he received was the regulations on the liturgy. That is, how to build the temple, how to celebrate the feasts, when they'd be celebrated, what kind of vestments would be used, what kind of sacrifice would be offered, what kind of prayers would be said. Very detailed description of how to worship. And Cardinal Ratzinger points out that this is very important because without a social context, individual moral law just becomes individualism. But without the religious context of proper worship, of God's transcendence, then it simply becomes interworldly, human, eventually humanistic, and eventually anti-human, because these laws without God end up enslaving man rather than freeing him. I mean, I'm summarizing that, but you can see a beautiful development of that in the book. So, the liturgical law that was given on Sinai was, according to Cardinal Ratzinger, the foundation of all the rest. Then Moses comes down from the mountain, and what does he hear? He hears singing and dancing and lots of music and noise. And he sees his brother-in-law Aaron leading the people in worship of a golden calf. And Moses, as you know, breaks the 10 Commandments and has them grind the calf up into dust. And Cardinal Ratzinger, in a way of kind of light sarcasm, sees here a perfect example of what liturgical committees do. That is, they want to sit around in a circle, look at themselves, and invent something new, as opposed to what Moses was doing, receiving from God, from on high, a liturgy that man could not invent. And this is a constant theme of Cardinal Ratzinger prior to his election to the papacy, that the liturgy has too often become a construct, something fabricated by human intelligence, and human design, and not something received as a gift of the Church. So that was an important foundation that he laid in his book, the Exodus experience of a liturgy which is given to us from God.